Okay, good. Here we go.
Greetings, everyone, as you're entering our session today. Welcome so much and greetings. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started pronto. And the session is being recorded. So let's get started. Greetings. My name is Edna Davis-Brown, Implementation Specialist for the Center for Adoption Support and Education based in Burtonsville, Maryland. Presenting with me today is my colleague, Lisa Maynard, who is also an Implementation Specialist with NTI, and you'll hear from her in a moment. We are incredibly pleased to have a seasoned NTI champion with us today, Sarah Gersten Zhang, with the Adoption and Foster Family Coalition of New York. So we'll be hearing from Sarah a little bit later, and we're just incredibly pleased to have her with us. Today's webinar is entitled Applying Key NTI Concepts and Tools Using Therapeutic Parenting Strategies to Address Challenging Behaviors. And again, this is part of our NTI Transfer of Learning Tuesday series. Next slide. We want to know who's with us today in terms of your role. I know Dawn Wilson had asked you to put your name and where you work or where you're from in the chat box. Continue to do that. We also want to know a little bit about your role, which you may have already put in the chat box as well. Are you a member of the Adoption Constellation? Are you an administrator, supervisor, caseworker, case manager, therapist, social worker, other? And tell us one thing that brings you joy. And for me, I most recently went deep sea fishing with my brother in North Carolina at Carolina Beach near Moorhead. And that really brought me joy, even though I only caught about 20 fish, nice red snappers though. Just being on the ocean was just so peaceful. So thank you again for joining us and for sharing in the chat box who you are and what brings you joy.
Edna, we've got folks from all over the country, from upstate New York and Nashville, Tennessee, and Texas and California and Maine. And folks are saying paddleboarding and family and beaches bring them joy, being with family. So lots of great joyful things in the chat box. Sunshine, yeah, love this time of year. Happy first day of spring, the longest day of the year.
Wonderful, awesome. We love having people from everywhere, from every walk with us. So let's talk about today's agenda. You'll get a brief overview of NTI. We'll talk about the impact of trauma on attachment, which is one of the key underpinnings of NTI, and a module focuses on that. We'll talk about practicing therapeutic parenting strategies and tools. And of course, our guest presenter, Sarah Gersten Zhang, will be presenting. You'll get information about how to access NTI because we want you to use it, right? This is part of our purpose today as well. And of course, throughout the session, you can put your comments and your questions in the chat box. So please feel free to do that. So let's go to the next slide. As in everything, we want to have objectives so that you can sort of measure what we're learning. And I have to click a box here. Thank you for that request. Someone asked for closed captioning, and then I hope that's working. Looks like it is below. Thank you. So, session objectives. At the end of this session, you, our participants, will be able to describe access options for NTI's web-based, self-paced, free training. You'll be able to identify features of NTI, knowledge and skills that can be applied with child welfare and mental health organizations. You'll be able to describe the therapeutic strategies for helping parents develop realistic expectations and reframe discipline as teaching. Learn strategies designed to help parents promote felt safety for the child and help establish parents as primary agents of healing and safety. Next slide. So a little bit about C.A.S E. I'm hoping that most of you have probably heard of C.A.S E. If not, the Center for Adoption Support, C.A.S E, Center for Adoption Support and Education, was created in 1998 to provide post-adoption counseling and education services to families in Maryland, Northern Virginia, and Washington, D.C. We are a private, nonprofit services agency envisioning that everyone touched by foster care and adoption has access to the adoption competent support necessary to navigate their lifelong journey. The National Adoption Mental Health Training Initiative, or NTI, builds upon the firm foundation of the unique expertise and core values of C.A.S E. To learn more about C.A.S E, visit www.adoptionsupport.org. And through our work, we've seen a need for change in how we address the mental health needs of children. The Children's Bureau grant was an opportunity to address these gaps. So let's see what you know about NTI. So what do you know about NTI? Feel free to put it in the chat box. I have no clue. I've heard about it somewhere. I heard about it and I've actually started NTI. I heard, started, completed NTI, and maybe even you got listed on our national directory. So feel free to share that in the chat box. If anyone can kind of let us know what the responses are as to where people are.
A number of people have heard about it and registered, and a couple have started, and there are a few who are saying no clue. So this is a great opportunity. Part of our purpose today is to make sure that folks around the country do know about NTI, and then at the end we'll tell you how to get access to it as well.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Lisa. So let's talk about a little bit more about NTI. Again, we mentioned that it is free. So we want you to remember that. Of course, there was a cost affiliated with the development and the field testing, et cetera, but for you to access it, it is indeed free. It consists of 2 web-based self-paced trainings. One is for child welfare and one is for mental health professionals. The curriculum is not identical, but there's so many tools and free resources to enhance casework and clinical practice. It also focuses on therapeutic strategies to assess behavioral challenges. And it is really focusing on a shared language for child welfare and mental health professionals. So we really try to foster collaboration through this effort. It's standardized, it's portable, it's accessible 24/7, and provides opportunities for reflection, and it is not trainer dependent. So why is this specialized training needed? So glad you asked. Through the NTI web-based trainings, C.A.S.E. supports a common core of mental health and adoption learning that will enhance the ability of the child welfare and mental health professionals to speak this shared language that I spoke about before. And really because of traumatic life experiences and early losses, many children who are adopted in guardianship or foster care experience elevated risk for developmental, health, emotional, and behavioral challenges. So indeed, specialized training is critical, just important to the field. So let's talk about some of these issues that are so important as it relates to NTI. Next slide. Just a little bit more about this. The impact of these experiences and challenges compromises well-being and family stability. So here are some of the key things about these problems that are magnified by the fact that many behavioral health professionals do not have really the adequate training in the needs of foster, adoptive, and guardianship children. And what we've learned quite a bit when we ask folks, well, how much training have you had in this area, especially in grad and undergrad and postgrad? And people say very limited, if any, in terms of the focus. So you'll see here, I won't read them all, but some critical things that are paramount in terms of the focus on mental health challenges. And we talk about the utilization of clinical services. 1/3 of children had emotional problems, 40% had educational problems, and 80%, I want to emphasize this, 80% of children who come into foster care have a significant mental health need, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. So much here to support why NTI and why specialized training. Lisa, let's talk about trauma.
Okay, let's talk about trauma and attachment. So type in the chat box, what has your experience been with working with children and families who've experienced trauma? Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. I'm sure many of you are working with kids and families who've had these experiences. And how does trauma impact those children and those families? There's a huge impact, right? We see this in the work that we're doing, and it's harder and harder for us to address their needs, especially if we don't have a real clear understanding of those core issues of adoption. Traumatic experiences can initiate strong emotions, strong reactions, and can persist long after the event takes place. And for many of our kiddos, they're experiencing these traumas over and over again. It's not typically a one-time situation. Children might feel terror, helplessness, fear, as well as physiological reactions, right? The pounding heart, the sweaty palms, the maybe upset stomach, vomiting, loss of bladder or bowel control. All these things are normal experiences of trauma. And even though we adults work to keep kids safe, dangerous events still happen. When trauma occurs, children fear for their lives. They worry that they're going to be severely hurt, maybe die, or maybe they're somebody who's very important to them, mother, father, is going to be severely hurt or die. They witness that violence, maybe the loss of a loved one, and then have that effect of post-traumatic stress. Without treatment, repeated childhood exposure to traumatic events can affect the brain and nervous system. So a lot of research has been done in this area to show the impact of trauma on the brain, and it's pretty fascinating and pretty scary for our kids. Traumatic stress can lead to increased use of health and mental health services and increased involvement with the child welfare and juvenile justice systems. Adult survivors often have trouble with relationships because they haven't had that adequate nurturing, that adequate brain development to have healthy relationships and a healthy sense of self as well. Many children and youth who have experienced trauma from abuse and/or neglect simply don't have the capacity to meet adult expectations. So oftentimes we'll see kids acting out, having behaviors or not being able to do things, not following directions, those kinds of situations. A large majority have these neurological impairments resulting in poor executive functioning skills. And that results in the inadequate development of the brain's prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that has to do with high level functioning, decision-making, problem solving, other high level skills, right? So when that is impaired, kids have a very hard time of having a healthy response, what we might call a reasonable response to sort of typical situations. In order for children to heal, the trauma has to be over. There has to be no more trauma, right? We cannot heal while we're in the midst of trauma. And so, just a sort of an example of that could be what we've experienced throughout the pandemic. Can't sort of get through that agitation, can't get through that traumatic experience, isolation, the fear of getting sick, the fear of somebody dying that you love, while it's still going on and the news is saying, giving numbers of how many people die every day, or here are the things that you have to do. That's just a small example. We can't heal from that until we're out of that situation. Healing occurs in relationship. It occurs in the context of family. And I think Sarah's going to talk about this too. As therapists, as social workers, we do a lot of work with children and families to help them heal, give them the tools that they need. But children, adults, individuals all need healing in the context of a safe and loving family. I just loved this graphic. So this shows parenting, like what we believe will help in parenting. This is how much it takes, how much effort it takes in parenting over time. And we think, okay, so it's going to be really busy at the beginning and really probably stressful, especially if you're parenting an older child or maybe a newborn, with all the behaviors and the crying and the up all night, sleepless nights and that thing. And over time, it sort of reduces. And down here, sort of the reality of parenting. Oh my goodness, we're going like all over the place, right? And somebody help me. And so what we're here to talk about is help that is really appropriate and effective for children and families who are in adoption, kinship, guardianship, foster families. So some of the tools that are embedded in NTI, we're going to talk about those really briefly for those of you who don't know anything about NTI. So it's loaded with therapeutic parenting strategies. We're going to focus on some of these lessons that are that address the behaviors that are most problematic for parents and often threaten adoption stability, focusing on attunement, felt safety, understanding and reframing behaviors, developing realistic expectations for children and for ourselves, by the way, and providing a balance of nurture and structure, teaching self-regulation and coping skills. All of these skills, knowledge, tools, strategies are embedded in the NTI trainings with lots of downloadable resources and information that you can use just right off the bat. So here are just a few examples of things that kids have told us, things that children have reported in therapy at C.A.S.E. I just want to know more about who I am. Little typo there. My parents will love me only if I behave to their expectations. I feel like a cereal box with no ingredients. Even my furniture has a tag on it that says what it's made of. Written on the tag says, "Do not remove." Right? Don't take me out of this place. Some of these quotes are noted in David Brzezinski's work as well. I have 2 adopted children, and my son said to me when he was about 18, "How do you know I'm not just like my birth father?" The statement just really surprised me. I honestly hadn't thought a whole lot about my son's birth father. Thought a lot and talked a lot about birth mother, birth family, but not specifically, you may or may not be like your birth father. It was kind of eye-opening for me. We want to, in our work, balance nurture and structure. We want to teach parents how to balance nurture and structure. This means that parents need to remain nurturing and meet all their child or teen's reasonable needs and requests. All their reasonable needs and requests, right? Not all of them. All of our kids don't need a trip to Hawaii or winter in Switzerland, right? They don't need the newest iPhone. I hear this all the time, kids who are like, okay, the iPhone 13 just came out, we better get it. Well, we just got an iPhone last year. What are we doing here, right? It's not necessarily a reasonable request or a need. And so that first goal is to improve self-regulation. The first goal in improving self-regulation is setting firm, realistic behavioral expectations. How do we say yes when it's really appropriate and it's okay, when we don't have to control things? I think of my daughter when she was 3 years old, wanting to wear her brother's huge clothes, big shorts, nasty t-shirts, and she wanted to wear those to school. And I finally gave up while all her little friends in her class were wearing cute little Polly Flinders dresses with matching bows in their hair. It's like, okay, I don't need to make that a control issue, right? I don't need to get into a fight about that. So saying yes when you can, a compromise when possible, and then saying no when it's necessary. Modeling self-control, right? Really having that sense of self-regulation. Consistency is important, but it doesn't mean being rigid. I said no, no means no, now and forever. Well, maybe every now and then no means, well, all right, it's a special occasion. You could have ice cream for dinner. Another important component to teaching limits is for parents to praise desirable behaviors rather than always focusing on the negative. That gets old, right? We wouldn't like it if people were doing that to us, but that could be a significant shift for some parents. And then phrasing instructions in the positive. Replace the what not to do with the what to do. So, for example, it's not okay to hurt people. Instead of stop hitting. I have a relative who used to hit her son every time he hit my son and told him to stop hitting. It's like, wait a minute, what are we teaching this child, right? So reframing. So using phrases like be gentle, or wow, that was a really good job. Maybe you want to try it this way next time. So using some examples, reframing that behavior. We want to talk a little bit about can't versus won't behavior. Oftentimes, parents and families, and sometimes even therapists, think about the child as being manipulative. And we judge that, and we think they are just being stubborn and manipulative, and they're digging their heels in, and what I say goes. And of course, then we find ourselves digging our heels in, right? And so finding that can't versus won't behavior. What's the difference? What is a child actually able to do, and what are they not able to do? Again, going back to those realistic expectations. So the neurosequential model of therapy, and we talk about this in NTI, was being developed by Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, a leading expert in childhood trauma. And they've developed this developmentally sensitive neurobiologically informed approach to clinical work. If you haven't seen any of Bruce Perry's videos, I really highly recommend them. So this approach to therapy is based on what Dr. Perry knows about brain development, including these basics. Brains develop from the lower part that mediate simple functions like breathing, heart rate, and body temperature to the higher parts that mediate complex functions like language and abstract thinking, problem solving, decision making. A lot of this development happens in the first 4 years of life. And a lot of that is impacted by abuse and neglect and the things that we see when children come into foster and guardianship care. The research and the theoretical approach of NMT can be helpful in explaining why many are finding success with neuroscience interventions such as neurofeedback, sensory integration, repetitive movement. I'm a fan of trauma-sensitive yoga, sensory input, breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and other techniques that have been really useful in helping children's brains grow and develop in a healthy manner. So, Edna, do you want to talk a little bit more about this neurosequential approach?
Oh, sure, absolutely. If you look at Bruce's sort of hierarchy of brain function here, this model is really a biologically respectful approach to treating children. Again, developed by Bruce D. Perry, and it's not a specific therapeutic technique or intervention. It's an approach that integrates core principles of neurodevelopment and traumatology to inform work with children, families, and communities in which they live. It has pretty much three key components: training, capacity building, assessment, and then the specific recommendations for the selection and sequencing, I'm having problems pronouncing today, of therapeutic, educational, and enrichment activities to match the needs and strengths of children. So Lisa, let's talk about the circle of security here. Now, it's a visual map of attachment. The father of attachment theory, John Bowlby, said this about attachment. Intimate attachments to other humans bring the hub around which a person's life revolves, not only as an infant or a toddler or a school child, but throughout adolescence and years of maturity as well, and on into old age. From these intimate attachments, a person draws strength and enjoyment of life through what he contributes, gives strength and enjoyment to others. These are matters about which current science and traditional wisdom are at one. And I'm going to admit someone here. So here are some founding principles that underlie the circle of security models of intervention. Attachment problems and empathy in early childhood. Someone just joined us. Would you mute, Sharon? Thank you. Attachment problems in infancy and early childhood increase the probability of psychopathology later on in life. Secure attachment relationships with caregivers are a protective factor for infants and preschoolers, setting the foundation for social competence and promoting effective functioning of the emotion regulation and stress response systems. The quality of the attachment relationship is amenable to change. Learning, including therapeutic change, occurs from within a secure base relationship. Lasting change in the attachment relationship comes from the caregivers developing specific relationship capabilities rather than learning techniques to manage behavior. Of course, all caregivers want the best for their children, right? So with all that in mind and all those key principles that are really a part of NTI, let's now turn it over to Sarah Gersten-Zhang. She will share how she has put the skills and tools embedded in NTI to use in her own work. Sarah?
Thanks so much, Edna. Thrilled to be with all of you here today. And I just want to give a brief introduction about myself. I am a licensed clinical social worker, but most importantly, I have a number of children, some who came to me by giving birth to them, some of whom I fostered, adopted, been a kinship parent, and those experiences actually have been the most valuable in terms of understanding this work. I'm also the board president of the Adoptive and Foster Family Coalition of New York. So I'm not an employee, I'm a volunteer there, but I'm happy to talk to you about some of our work as well. And just very briefly about the coalition, we provide information support and advocacy for families in New York State. And we are currently in process with Lisa's help of developing an adoption foster care therapeutic network in our state. We'll be using some of this NTI training there. So if you are welcome to visit our website and learn more about what we do. So today, as Edna said, I'm going to be focusing on some of the most important points from the training, and as well as and also focusing on how I have used the material in my own practice. I highly encourage you all to complete all the modules. I see there's a wide range on this call today of some who finished the whole training, some are just beginning it, but there is just extremely valuable. It's a sort of a complete set of tools and information. It's really valuable to go through all of it. So, in thinking about some of the very important points that are reflected in this module, I wanted to first talk about complex developmental trauma, just following up a little bit on what Edna and Lisa shared already. There's some research at Stanford University, which has they've developed a therapeutic intervention for kids with what they call pediatric PTSD. And they have about 7 modules, and because they're a well-financed university, they're able to sort of switch up the different interventions, the 7 units, and do them in different order. And what they have found is that the most effective module is the one where they teach kids about what they call pediatric PTSD, right? This education about why you have these feelings is very effective. And I think we could say the same for parents. So parents need to learn, if they haven't come from a place where they've experienced trauma themselves, and certainly not complex developmental trauma, it might take them a little bit of time to fully grasp what is happening with their kids. So I often use the example of it. Well, this certainly is a physiological condition. So I often use the example with parents, it's like diabetes, right? And it's not something that the child has control over all the time, but with the proper monitoring and thinking, things can go much better. A dad I worked with said, the most important thing I've learned is that our relationship with his child is sometimes in flux because of her complex developmental trauma. I can't forget when she's having a hard time about all the good parts of our relationship. And I shouldn't become rigid in response to her poor behavior, right? He's understanding that sometimes his child is triggered and that he just shouldn't be responding to that moment, but just the arc of the whole relationship. And sometimes I like to show parents this little bird. I know I'm a very tiny little square, but if you can see this little bird, my daughter made for me when she was in camp one summer. And it's this beautiful little wool bird. It has this cutest little face on it. And I was so touched one time. And so I keep it up on my dresser. And one time when she was having a very hard time, so I guess I'll show it again, she pulled the wings off of it. So I came to my dresser and there was this sweet little bird, but with no wings. And she was having a very hard time. Then I came back another time and she had actually pinned, you can see these little safety pins on the wings, pinned the wings back on and had tied this ribbon to hold the wings back on. So I often think about this little bird as a physical reminder of how hard life is for all our beautiful little birds that we're parenting or helping other parents parent. So next, I would like to talk about another very important point, which is implicit memory. And implicit memory is extraordinarily important because once parents understand the concept, it helps them understand, why does my child behave the way they do? And I think it's very hard for parents to really grasp implicit memory because most of us have and the vast majority of people in the world have lived with the same family their entire life. And so a memory that's happened when you're a very small child, your family talks about, and it's kind of embedded in the entire culture of the family. And parents are often in denial about implicit memory. So they will say, because they got really what they wanted, which was to be a parent when they've taken children into their home, it's very hard for them to think about what happened to their child before they came to them. So I've had so many parents say to me, she was in an orphanage, but it was the nicest place. The staff were so lovely. And it really was like a home. And I say, well, did the caregivers take vacation? Were there more than two of them? And all of these things, which were really challenging the idea that an orphanage really is a nice place for any human being to live in. And another sort of technique I use is talking about movies. So I say, all of us have a movie of our life, right? And but before your kids joined your movie, they have their own movie, right? So they have all of these things, and it's very important for you to understand what happened in their movie before they joined your movie, because they're going to be responding in certain ways, some of which they remember and might be able to talk about, like abusive or neglectful or other things or frightening things that happened to them, and some of which they will not be able to talk about. So the things they remember are explicit. They can talk about explicit memory, but the things that are sort of outside of their awareness, but might be sensory impressions, are part of their implicit memory. So on the next slide, you will see some quotes from children who were adopted at birth. And this speaks to the implicit memory, right? If you are adopted, some of these parents are in the hospital with children, but yet these children have had an experience of being created and grown by two other parents. This is, I love this one. I probably felt nervous and sad about my birth parents throwing me away like trash. I have had kids use the phrase trash so many times. It's just, or garbage. I was a piece of garbage. So this is very, very important for parents and therapists to understand that just because you're living in a wonderful, happy family, you still have those implicit memories and experiences from previously. I have this feeling that my parents are imposters, and I don't like that feeling. Many kids are living with that every day. This idea that they can't quite trust their parents. And that is a very scary feeling for a child. So lastly, this is my family. I'm getting the phone because from my dad. So in a lot of the work that I do, and I know this is discussed in the module, is I have kids draw pictures, and then they tell me what's happening in the picture. It's a very effective technique to get at what's inside their head. So this is my family. I'm getting the phone from my dad. I'm not feeling that much because I'm on the device, right? That's why he wants the device, so he doesn't have to feel so much. If I wasn't on the device, I would be miserable because other family would be talking with each other and leaving me out. And this actually, certainly the quotes in orange and yellow really speak to what I would call a core feeling of loneliness. Many, 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 if not all children who have had complex developmental trauma join a new family have a very deep feeling of loneliness, which, is a very frightening and unhealthy feeling for a child to be experiencing every day. And just one note on this slide, I often have parents talk about adoption problems, my adoption problems, or my child's upset because of the adoption. And what I try and use the correct language, using the idea of, your child had the experiences before they were adopted, right? Adoption is, or kinship care, as part of the solution to give children a parent, as Lisa said earlier. The most important therapeutic intervention for a child who's had complex developmental trauma is getting a parent, right? So we need to talk about the relinquishment by the birth parents, the traumatic experiences that happened. And on the next slide, I want to show a little bit more about how I do this in practice. So I know this is not the best drawing, but I wanted to give you a feeling for sort of the home craft that I do in my session. So I put this all on one page, but typically this would actually be each colored line would be a strip of paper, and then all of those pieces of paper would be taped together. And so that these timelines would actually be, very, very long. They're many feet long. And at the end, I know Edna has a slide with all the resources I'm going to mention, but I'm just going to talk briefly about this timeline today, but I highly recommend this, The Science of Parenting Adopted Children by Arleta James. And in there, she talks quite a bit more about the timeline. So just to focus on this one. So first, you see where I've written in utero, that first bluish bit that's colored in. So that's the experience that the child had when they were lived with, their biological mother for almost a year. And then this is sort of an amalgamation of a lot of different stories that I've heard in my time. But that next red period for 2 months could be a lot of things. It could be the child moved to a foster family. Maybe they were in the NICU, in the hospital. Maybe they lived with, their paternal aunt. Maybe they lived in an orphanage. And then the next bit in green, the child is now moved again. They may have lived in a foster family. They may have moved from the first orphanage to a second orphanage because now an adoptive family has been identified. That's very common practice in some other countries. And then orange in this case, so the child picks, the color they would like for each segment of their life when they had a different caregiver other than their biological, or starting with their biological parent, but then having another adult who was in charge of their well-being. Right. So in this case, the child's on orange. When I do this, I actually update it on the child's birthday every year. I will have them extend. So this child in this timeline is 11 years and 2 months. And the reason that I do this, one is to help the child understand that they are going to stay on, in this case, orange. So sometimes I'll say to a kid, what color are you on today? What color were you on yesterday? So it's kind of cements in the fact that they have been with their parents, hopefully for some large chunk of time, and that's the color they're going to stay on. That's the family they're going to be with for the rest of their lives, because they have these implicit memories of their moves. I also do this for the parents because many parents have a hard time when they're being challenged all the time, right? In this therapeutic parenting that they sometimes didn't even understand they were signing up for. They have a very hard time in really grasping that they are the parent, they are going to be the parent. And so sometimes going through this and seeing so much orange can actually help them really feel in charge and, fully the parent as they need to be of their child. So anyway, I find this is a super, super important and first step in a therapeutic relationship with a family to do this exercise. And so speaking to the challenges, I'd like to now move to the next slide. And I would love to know in the chat if anyone has an idea of what I might be thinking about with this slide. there's any ideas.
So Levi says teamwork, camaraderie. Any other thoughts? I will say that I feel like I've got to be prepared and ready for attack.
Yeah.
Synchronicity and commitment, perseverance, working toward a common goal.
Yep.
Shannon says PTSD.
Yeah.
Jenny, resiliency. Battle fatigue, Shannon says. Preparation and always ready. Ready for anything, right, Alva?
Right. These are fantastic. Okay, so I gotta get a copy of these because this is even beyond what I had been thinking. I love this friendly fire. Whoa, excellent. Okay. Yeah. So what I often say, I have parents who come to me and I mean, they're at their wits' end. I mean, that's a lot of families start therapy when there's verbal, physical abuse, kids can't function in their schools. So a lot, usually there's some crisis. It's very rare that, and occasionally somebody will say, I'm thinking of adopting, or I have these kids in mind and I'm not sure, or my grandchildren might come to me, but often, people are a little bit caught off guard. And they come to us in some of the same states as the kids. They are filled with shame. They feel really not competent and capable. And so I finally came up with this idea, and I think it was honestly around the time the Navy SEALs parachuted into Osama bin Laden's compound. And I thought to myself, what it must have taken for those and men in that case. I don't know if they're women Navy SEALs, but we certainly do our part in the parenting arena. And I thought, what must it have taken for those people to change their bodily responses to fear, to be going into a situation where they felt threatened, they felt, unsafe. And I thought to myself, this is really what a lot of parents that I work with need to do. So I say to these parents, you're not just doing average parenting. Average parenting, it can be challenging, but for the most part, it kind of, you have a baby, you take care of yourself when you're pregnant, your baby is primed to love you, you love them, and things sort of unfold from there. But this kind of parenting is usually the hardest thing that the parents I work with have ever done, right? It's the most challenging thing, and they really often can't talk about it in public. And so I say, you need to be thinking about meeting the challenges that your children are facing, because you are not me as the therapist, not any other type of therapy, even though some of those can be helpful, but you are the number one solution to a healthier adulthood for this child. So I try and say that, and I say to them, you need to be thinking and preparing, doing your deep breathing, doing the yoga, as Lisa mentioned, and other things like that to keep yourself in a more calm state, because kids cannot stay regulated if their parents are unregulated. That I'm going to repeat that. It is extremely important. There have done multiple studies on this. When parents are dysregulated, kids cannot stay regulated. And so it is the, sort of the most important point to start with. I also want to talk about this because I really want to reduce, again, as I mentioned, the shame that the parents are feeling, because I want, when parents come into me to talk to me, I want them to be able to talk about how I've started drinking again. I'm so stressed out. I'm shouting at my child. A mom told me recently she had cut the tendon in her hand slamming a glass down because she was so upset about the chaos really in their family. And so I really, as a therapist, I really need to understand what's happening at home so I can help parents get the support that they need. So let's move to some of the solutions once parents get themselves regulated and feel supported. So TheraPlay is just, you know, an amazing intervention. Here's the whole book you can buy if you're interested. It'll be again in the resources at the end. This TheraPlay is the solution to this feeling of aloneness and separation that children feel, right? So they need to be connected to other human beings and especially to their parents. So some of the things I use in my office, I know this is in the module as well, and probably in the resources as well in the module, but you know, just doing a simple ball toss or like a super soft, like little cotton ball or a feather on the child's arm, or like the child can close their eyes and try and guess where the little soft thing is is touching them. So just very, very simple ways to connect. Kids often have a very hard time in a group, like you have people over for dinner. So one of the things I used to do with one of my kids was just like a little, you know, finger touching under the table, her hand and my hand, and we would touch and connect. And that actually allowed her to regulate herself and to just sit quietly, you know, as the dinner was happening, or engage in conversation would be even better. But she felt connected to me, and therefore she felt safe in this setting, which actually created social anxiety for her. So another great idea, parent reflection. I know that this was also mentioned, you know, in the modules, talking about journaling, talking about doing, making videos of yourself with your, when you're having a hard time. I think Karen Purvis mentioned this, and it might not seem like capturing your not great parenting at the time, but it's a way to look back. I say to parents, bring it in. Often they're capturing also so I can see how really out of control their child is getting. Sometimes in, you know, I live in New York City, so sometimes on street corners and unsafe in other places where it's not that safe. There's a lot of cars around, but that gives me an opportunity. First of all, the parents can see themselves, and it gives me an opportunity to talk about, just sort of Lisa had talked about before, about focusing on the positive of what your child is doing. I can do that as well, right? I can say to parents like, you know, wow, that was really great. See how calm you stayed, you know, the child, you know, your child was super out of control. But look, they didn't really run outside of the bus shelter, even though they were really crazy. I can see how close they were staying to you. That must mean that they really know that they're safer near you. And so I can just really focus on those positives. They can see themselves. I say, what do you think? What would you wish you had done better here? What do you think? You know, if we back up this video to the beginning, you know, what do you think might have helped, or maybe even right before the video started? Another thing I've told parents to do is, I know in the modules, I think there's a dad maybe with a daughter, and they're talking about thinking about how your face looks, your tone of voice. So I often suggest hanging up more mirrors in your household. So as you're talking to your child, you can actually see your own reflection. Again, getting back to this idea of the Navy SEAL, it is very, very hard when somebody is swearing at you or whatever, being very rude, to stay in this kind of calm, pleasant, you know, engaged, but not reactive face and tone. But watching yourself can really help with that. And secondly, I would say, seeing some of the clips in the module really made me think about documentaries. So I think, you know, using those clips with clients yourself that are in the module, or finding other documentaries like Whoa, I Need Mommy is an amazing documentary. In that case, the child was about 8. Child came from China. And it's a really tough situation for this mom, especially. She had adopted another child and had 2 biological children, but this child had been through a lot. And you can see her really struggling. It's a really great way for parents to actually have some reflection about the way, what's effective and what's not effective in parenting. And it's also a way to, it's a possibility like to watch with them and to think about it together. I often use these documentaries as well with children. Like, what do you think she was feeling? Wow, that was kind of similar to your experience. So I find, I mean, there's many good ones, and it's a wonderful resource. So, okay, so next, group support. I don't think anyone can get through this kind of parenting alone, right? You need a good therapist is extremely helpful, but group support is also extraordinarily helpful. So at the coalition, all of our groups, our trainings, we have a private Facebook group. All of those things are run by adoptive parents, people who are in foster care or adopted, or maybe had a kinship experience, people who've been foster parents. And so they can really, when they say, I know, the parent understands that they really understand, you know, how out of control things can get within your home. So I highly recommend, if you are a therapist who's had, you know, you've had some of these experiences, like sharing some of that with your clients, because I think it actually gives you legitimacy. If you're not a person, there's many fantastic therapists who have not been adoptive parents, but it might be a great addition to the work you're doing is to refer parents to groups where other people's kids are behaving in the same way as their children. So that's kind of a quick, you know, reflection, I guess, on the module from my perspective. And I just thought I would add a few last notes here, which in some of this may be covered in some of the other modules, but I just thought they were worth mentioning today because they're such a big part of therapeutic parenting. So the first thing I would mention is that if, in addition to all of the modules, there's 2 books written about with regard to dialectical behavioral therapy, but they're the parenting component of that therapy. So one is Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions, and the other one is Parenting a Teen. Those will again be in the resource section, but those books were written for kids with these extreme behavioral challenges. And I highly recommend as a therapist and to recommend them to their parents. I just, before this training session, just reminding a mom with 2 teenagers, don't forget to leave this blue book by your bed. It's your Bible, and read it when you're just feeling super overwhelmed yourself and can't, you know, having a hard time thinking of a productive way to, you know, engage with your child. So this, and then the last 2 things I wanted to talk about were eating issues. Eating and sleep are 2 of the areas of therapeutic parenting that are often not talked about. I think every child I've ever worked with has either been an over or an under eater or had some issues around food. So there's an amazing doctor, Katya Rao, who has a website called thefeedingdoctor.com. And I know Edna has added her book, which is called Love Me, Feed Me, to the resources. She really has a wonderful, trust-based approach to eating, which not only helps parents sort through like nutritional issues, but also increases the attachment between the parent and the child. So I highly recommend that. Sleep is, I mean, we could talk for this whole hour and a half about sleep. It is so extraordinarily important. And if I go back to the research at Stanford, one of the professors there doing the researchers, Victor Carrion, has written a book talking about the different areas of the body that are impacted by complex developmental trauma, such as memory and executive function, which I think Lisa mentioned. But the other area is sleep, right? We all know this, right? We're still in a pandemic, right? I'm sure all of us could not sleep initially, right? We didn't feel safe. And so I think our traditional ideas about sleep really have to be examined with regard to children. I often say to parents, what is smarter? If you're feeling super anxious, you can't sleep, what is smarter than going in to try and sleep with your parents or being near them? It's our natural human response when we feel unsafe. Like if we think about, a very long time ago, children would never have been safe sleeping separately from their parents, right? There were too many dangers. So maybe this sort of primal reaction is actually a very healthy thing. So just some food for thought there. And lastly, I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the structure of therapy. First, I want to share this cartoon, which I have hanging in my office. My daughter was just home and she saw it and she said, "That's pretty funny." She just smiled right at me. She knew exactly what I was thinking hanging this up, right? Because this is the fear of every child who has been separated from their biological family, right? I'm going to be left alone. I'm not going to be safe. Somebody is not going to be there to care for me. That is what's underneath all of their behavior. The therapy that we use to address that kind of feeling that the children have, there's I think a few helpful tips in terms of the structure. First of all, I often do my sessions in 90 minutes. So I have the parents and the child there. I have the child wait outside, and then I spend as much time with the parents as they need. So initially that might be 85 minutes with the parents. And then I always bring the child in very briefly at the end. And I say, "Oh my goodness, thank you so much for waiting. Your parents had so much to say today." But again, getting back to this idea that the parents have to be regulated for the child to be able to function at their best. So often after some time, I can spend 5 minutes with a parent, and then it might be 85 minutes with a child. And then I do my sessions every other week. This actually not my idea originally, some other clinicians, Greg Keck, Arleta James, and others. It's this talking about this stuff is very stressful and very hard for kids. And so if the parents can check in with me if they're having a very hard time in between, but every other week seems to be a very effective model. Again, this is very hard work. It's there are a few times where it might be just 6 months, but often it's years. And I was laughing, thinking to myself when I was preparing, thinking about this cartoon, because sometimes I'm the man saying to the parent who's a little crying dog, yeah, I'm here. I'm always here for you, right? You can count on me. I always say to the families, I sort of wind down, sometimes it's just once a month, but I sometimes have families who come back to me, several years later, just to check in because I know their story and I understand, I can quickly help them versus going someplace else. And so the last two things I want to mention is that it is very stressful sometimes to do this kind of work. I wore this sleeveless shirt today intentionally. It's not only a little bit humid in Brooklyn, but it's also the type of shirt that I wore all the time when I started this work, even in the middle of winter, because I was sweating so much from these super stressed parents that I found if I kept myself cool, I could stay calmer. So that's a tip. And lastly, I would say when you're doing this kind of work, it's very important to think about how you are supporting yourself. So, for myself, I do Pilates. I play tennis, which I have some fun. And I also get myself in a kind of a zone where I'm not thinking about this, the stress of the families, which sometimes leave me sleepless because the kids are in danger and, at times. But so anyway, I think it's really important to develop these things for yourself and to model it for the parents that you're working with. So I don't know where we are on time, but I would love to be able to answer questions or have just a conversation. Others might have some tips that they have found to be very effective in doing this type of work, or parts of the modules that they felt weren't focused on today that were very helpful for them. So just leave the door open.
Thank you,
Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah. And certainly if you have questions or comments, you can unmute or put them in the chat box. Sarah shared a lot of ideas and things that she's done in her work. So let's hear from you. What questions do you have?
We had a question, Sarah, about the video that you mentioned about the child from China. What was that video?
Yes, Woe I Ni, WOAINI, mommy. Which means I love you, mommy. And almost all.
It's like on YouTube.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's through Vimeo, but I think I bought it for $10 or something like that.
Alrighty.
That's it.
And then any other questions? So the thought that I had was that how hard this work is to work with families who are so stressed and who are so hurting themselves, right? It's really hard to see that your child is hurting, and how to stay self-regulated and how not to minimize what's going on for our kids. That sort of that I hear a lot from families that I work with is I just, I'm giving them all this love. I'm giving them everything they want and everything they need. And why isn't it working? And how important it is to really pay attention to those core issues and have different kinds of skills for parenting kids who are adopted from hard places.
Right. I think you bring up a really important point, Lisa, but we can do a lot of therapeutic parenting, and we can be the perfect parents, or perfect, good enough, but also the child themselves has to do some of the work, and so that is, I think, sometimes very hard for some parents to understand. It still is going to take time, pretty much all children who've had complex developmental trauma are going to suffer from depression and social anxiety. It's a very hard way to grow up, and one has to heal from that. it takes a lot of time, and parents are the solution, but it also has to come from you yourself. So yeah,
that's great. Thank you. And not every child is ready to do that at the outset. It might take a while for them to get there.
Absolutely.
We have a question. Any advice about a child who is refusing to participate in anything? I have a family who got guardianship of a child, but they're struggling because the child, they mean the child refuses to go to counseling.
Yeah, well, a lot of kids have been to counseling that has not been effective. And so they actually don't trust therapists, or they're afraid when somebody can see inside them, or might have some ideas. And it's very scary that some of their thoughts about themselves and other people are revealed. So I think, first of all, to know that you can do a tremendous amount by actually just meeting with the guardianship parents, right? That in itself is enormous. And then, it really depends on the situation. I think if the child has just come to the family, kind of like Lisa, you were mentioning early on, you have to have, felt safety. You have to feel safe in the family. I would wait, some bit of time if the child was very resistant. And then I would consider making it attractive for the child to come. If things are very bad in the family, the parents might say, this is something we're all doing because we want to have a happier family life. And to have the sort of family treat of electronics, you need to participate in family therapy, and it might take a while to get them there. So it's a little bit hard to answer without more detail, but usually you get there. You have to be patient.
Yeah, I find that it takes a while to build that rapport and for the child to feel like they want to open up at all. It takes much longer than anybody usually is expecting. Another question is, any advice, Sarah, on youth reaching the age of majority who are not prepared for independent living?
Well, I'm going to say it's a good question and a comment, right? Kids who have had complex, all of my kids who've had trauma have taken much longer to grow up. So it's a very form of parenting in terms of what your kids need. And I find that, if you can try and stay in a therapeutic relationship with a child, obviously, if they're the age of majority, they may make some mistakes that you cannot prevent. But sometimes those can be learning experiences if you're staying very open as a parent and able to help them through some of those situations.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
So I would say, right, it's really, I see tremendous growth in the early 20s. I mean, we know that, right, brain maturity, it happens around 26. I see tremendous growth in kids in the early 20s, both in terms of how they feel about themselves and how they fit into their families in that time period.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing. And a lot of the youth that I've worked with at 18, when they're graduating from high school, don't want to go to college, don't want to go away to college. And the families are like, what do you mean? This is what we've been working toward. But that sense of needing to be connected to their family is far stronger than that desire to go off and be on their own. And
absolutely. It can be terrifying, actually, the idea of going to college. Most of the families I work with, the year before, towards the end of high school, and can be a very rocky time. It's really, triggering implicit memory or explicit memory about previous abandonments.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. And if there are other questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. Wonderful presentation, focusing on how you've used NTI tools and strategies. I put on this slide photos of the books that Sarah referenced: The Science of Parenting Adopted Children, Theraplay, Love Me, Feed Me, Parenting a Child Who Has Intense Emotions, and Parenting a Teen Who Has Intense Emotions. Sarah's email address is here as well, along with the Adoption and Foster Family Coalition of New York. Check it out if you haven't looked at their site. Wonderful resources, and you definitely want to sign up for their listserv. So, Sarah, thanks again for joining us. If there aren't any further questions for Sarah, of course, just put them in the chat box. So we have some additional models or additional sort of tools and strategies embedded into NTI. Here are some wonderful links for you. We're going to be, again, sending you these slides so that you will have a copy of it and have access to all of this. Someone asked if there's a certificate for this training. Yes, there is. We ask that once we sign off, you will be getting an evaluation link. So in order to get your certificate of completion for this hour-and-a-half session, you have to complete the evaluation. Plus, we want to hear back from you about this session, and also it will help us to sort of shape our next session as well. So next slide.
Edna, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I've got, we have another question. I didn't mean to interrupt here, but for Sarah, we have some great information about fetal alcohol syndrome, but not a lot about children who have been born drug addicted. Do you have any direction in that area?
So I say there's a terrific book. There's not much written, or as much written about this as there should be, partly because it's very, very hard to, often, we'll know a child had, the parent was using because they'll test the baby at their birth. And in fact, probably the most damaging use of substances is early on in the development of the child, right? So, and we do know a lot of these substances, cigarettes or, other drugs that are not legal, are very harmful, but how to understand exactly how they're impacting development is challenging. But I would say, if you look at the work of Ira, I believe his name is Ira Chasnov, C.A.S.E. I believe, I think he's out of Illinois. He has, oh yes, thank you, Dawn. That is some of the best information out there, I think, about talking about how certain substances can impact, and it's sort of a good summation of the current research.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Dawn, Lisa, for putting that information in the chat box. Again, we will send you a copy of the slides, all the individuals who registered for this, we can automatically send that to you. If you're interested in NTI, Lisa and I are implementation specialists who provide support in getting this wonderful training implemented in your agency or help you to access it. Join us at www.adoptionsupport.org/NTI to learn more about NTI. It is jam-packed with so many tools and resources on that website that you will want to take a look at. We also have demo links of the training there as well. So how do you access NTI? We have, NTI is currently available for free via our C.A.S.E LMS, our learning management system, where we have a help desk and we have free NASW CEUs. And what a wonderful thing when you think about 25 CEUs for the NTI for supervisors, 20 CEUs for NTI for professionals, and the supervisor training has additional models, 5 hours additional, and for the mental health providers, 25 CEUs. So we encourage you to access us through the C.A.S.E LMS. I'm trying to look for the website, www.adoptionsupport.org/NTI access, but if you just go to the NTI website, you'll see access. Click on that, click on individuals, and it will take you right there. Just log in, it'll ask for your name and other information, and will give you a password and access to get into the CASE LMS site. Thank you, Lisa, for putting those on the screen. One thing that we have that I think is absolutely wonderful is a directory of trained professionals. For example, I got a call from, I think it was Ohio, and they were asking me, wow, we're looking for a professional, a clinician who has taken the training, and we want to know where they are and how to contact them. This directory is a directory of NTI trained professionals who have completed NTI, who have submitted their certificate of completion and their information about how you contact them. So this resource is on our website, available to you if you're seeking a professional, a clinician who has completed NTI. So we encourage you to do that. And if you're a clinician that's taking the training and you're about to complete the training, then we ask that you go in and sign up to be a part of this directory. You have to show proof that you've completed the NTI training by uploading your certificate. So we want you to share your expertise, and we want to share your expertise with those who need it. Next slide, Lisa. Any further questions or comments? I see people are saying thank you. We really appreciate you joining us today. And again, at the end of this session, please complete the evaluation. You will get a certificate of completion. We will also send the slides to all who have registered for this training or this session today. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dawn Wilson, who's our fearless leader, and she's like the Wizard of Oz behind the screen, allowing you to get in. I'm going to close out and end the session, so it will hopefully take you to the evaluation link. If not, you see mine and Lisa's contact information, let us know, and we'll make sure you get the link. Have a wonderful—
Thanks so much, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank
Sarah.
you.
Wonderful as always.
Bye,
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time, everyone. So good to see you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.